Top 10 Worst Ferraris in Company History. Today, you'll find out which Ferrari model lost a street race to an old Mitsubishi Lancer, which model led to a divorce and social media ridicule, which Ferrari accidentally exploded on startup, and which model won the title of the ugliest car of 2009. This video will include facts that might offend many due to the inconvenient truth, so we strongly urge sensitive viewers to turn off this video. To all the sensible viewers, enjoy watching. First, the Ferrari 488 Pista. So many ambitions and grand words were invested in this car, but let's face it, it's nothing more than a disappointment in a beautiful wrapper. Let's start with the fact that the Ferrari 488 Pista was supposed to be the epitome of speed and power. Yes, 720 horsepower sounds impressive, but try handling this monster in everyday life. The power that rips the car off the line might be great on the track, but in traffic, it's just torture. Want to look like an idiot who spent a fortune on a car useless in the city? The 488 Pista is at your service. Now let's talk about the suspension. Ferrari decided that sporting ambitions were more important than comfort, so the suspension in the 488 Pista is as stiff as a wooden board. Every bump, every uneven road surface, you will feel them with your entire body. A ride in the 488 Pista is like a free massage session, only far less pleasant. Looking for a car that will ensure constant visits to the chiropractor? Congratulations, you found it. The engine sound. Yes, the roaring sound of the V8 might be music to your ears on the track, but try enjoying it every day. Your neighbors definitely won't love you if you wake them up every morning with that hellish roar. Want your neighbors to hate you more than they already hate your lawn? Just start your 488 Pista at 6 a.m. and enjoy. Now about reliability. Ferrari has always had reliability issues, and the 488 Pista is no exception. One owner said his car spends more time in the shop than on the road. Constant electronic issues and overheating components are not what you expect from a car this expensive. Want to be better friends with your mechanic than your own family? Buy a 488 Pista and enjoy this privileged status. What about the interior design? Inside, the 488 Pista looks like a sterile operating room. Everything is for minimal weight and maximum performance. Comfort? Forget it. Hard racing seats and a minimalist dashboard. One owner said sitting in the 488 Pista is like sitting on a metal chair, only this chair costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Second, the Ferrari Testarossa. Many of us had posters of this car on our walls as kids, but who would have thought that behind the shiny facade lurked so many problems? The first thing that catches the eye is the design. Sure, the Testarossa looks impressive, but its practicality is terrible. Those famous side intakes? Just decoration, reminiscent of the grille on an old refrigerator. And the rear? It looks like someone decided to save on design and just slapped some shutters there. But the biggest disappointment, of course, is the performance. The Testarossa was a dream on paper, but in reality, a nightmare. The car's agility left much to be desired. Every steering movement felt like a battle with a car that stubbornly refused to follow your commands. Inside, things didn't get any better. Luxurious interior? No. It was like an attempt to cover the cabin with foil. The seats were hard and uncomfortable, and the dashboard looked like it was assembled from the leftovers of other Ferrari models. Even the build quality left much to be desired. And of course, we can't forget the main flaw, reliability. The Testarossa was so temperamental that even the most devoted fans lost patience. Constant electrical issues, frequent engine breakdowns, all made owning this car a real ordeal. The Ferrari Testarossa is a car best left in the past and not remembered. Third, if the Ferrari California were a movie, it would win the award for Worst Remake. This car was an attempt to create something accessible and versatile, but ended up being so boring that it could be used as a sleep aid. Let's start with the design. The California looked like it was made from a do-it-yourself template. A mix of lines, a lack of character and charm, all made the car look like a cheap parody of a real Ferrari. The exterior was so bland that you could think it was a Toyota trying its hand at making a sports car. And what about performance? Here too, everything is sad. The V8 engine sounded loud and confident, but in reality, it was so lazy that you might think you were driving a family minivan, not a Ferrari. The California's interior was also disappointing. The materials were cheap, the seats uncomfortable, and the dashboard looked like it was designed by a first-year student. Driving this car felt like you were in an ordinary sedan, not a prestigious sports car. And, of course, reliability. The California was known for its electronic problems and frequent breakdowns. Every time you got behind the wheel, you felt like a lottery participant, never knowing if the car would start today or not. The Ferrari California is a car best left on the shelf of history. Fourth, the Ferrari F50 was supposed to be the successor to the legendary F40, but instead, it became a symbol of disappointment and unmet expectations. Starting with the design, the F50 looked like a spaceship that accidentally landed on Earth. Yes, it was a sports car, but its lines and shapes were so awkward that it seemed as though the designers had gone overboard with their imagination. The huge rear wing and strange aerodynamic elements made it look like a toy from a sci-fi movie. Under the hood, the F50 housed a V12 engine that was supposed to provide unmatched power, but in reality, this engine was so temperamental that drivers spent more time in the garage than on the road. Constant tuning issues and frequent breakdowns made owning an F50 a real headache. The interior of the F50 didn't live up to expectations either. Sure, there was plenty of carbon fiber and other high-tech materials, but the comfort level was akin to that of a race car: hard, noisy, and uncomfortable. Drivers felt as if they were in an airplane cockpit rather than a sports car. And, of course, we can't forget about performance. The F50 was fast, but its handling left much to be desired. Every steering movement felt like a struggle with a car that didn't want to obey. At high speeds, the car became unstable and dangerous. The Ferrari F50 is an example of how high expectations can turn into a major disappointment. This car is best remembered as an unsuccessful experiment. Fifth, ladies and gentlemen, meet the Ferrari FF, a car that makes you wonder if you mistakenly entered a Ferrari dealership instead of the nearest Volvo showroom. This is a case where Ferrari decided that 4 seats and all-wheel drive were a great idea, but apparently forgot that the car also needed to be good. Starting with the looks, the FF appears as if the designers tried to merge a sports car with a family wagon. The result? A car that looks like a cross between an exotic beast and a boring grocery cart. These odd proportions and questionable body lines make the FF resemble a vehicle that can't decide whether it wants to be a racing car or a used minivan. Let's move to the engine. Yes, the FF has a powerful V12 under the hood, but honestly, this engine feels like a muscular athlete who constantly faints. You can hear the loud roar of the engine, but as soon as you press the gas pedal, it feels like you're driving a combine harvester. The car's interior is another reason for mockery. The FF's interior seems like an attempt to create something luxurious, but it looks like it was assembled from the leftovers of various cars. Low-quality plastic, uncomfortable seats, and a dashboard that resembles a mix of old technologies and modern misunderstandings. Every journey in this Ferrari feels like a ride in an ancient tractor, only with a higher likelihood of something breaking down. And what about handling? The all-wheel drive was supposed to provide excellent road grip, but in reality, the FF handles like a boat in a storm. Every steering movement causes a panicky feeling that the car will lose control and send you straight off the road. And of course, let's not forget reliability. The Ferrari FF is notorious for its breakdowns and constant visits to service centers. Owners see their mechanics so often that they start considering them part of the family. The Ferrari FF is a car that was supposed to symbolize innovation and luxury, but turned into a joke. If you want to see how not to make a car, just take a look at this masterpiece. Sixth, if you think Ferrari can't make mistakes twice in a row, think again. Here's the Ferrari 348, a car that once again made fans question whether Ferrari had simply become a new name for Fiat. The 348 was so terrible in handling that even a housewife in a minivan could overtake you on a winding road. For some reason, Ferrari decided it was more important to make the car as temperamental as an Italian prima donna, rather than as controllable as a racing car. The result? A car that refused to obey the steering wheel as often as it could. The car's interior was a separate topic for ridicule. Inside the 348, you could find low-quality plastic that looked like it was taken from an old Soviet refrigerator. The seats were so uncomfortable that even a short trip turned into torture. But the biggest failure was the engine. Yes, it was a V8, but so lazy that it seemed like it had been replaced with a lawnmower engine. It hummed and roared, but as soon as you pressed the gas pedal, it became clear that this Ferrari had no plans to hurry anywhere. The 348 was such a disaster that even Ferrari admitted their mistakes and soon introduced an updated version, but it was too late. The model's reputation was hopelessly ruined. Seventh, Ferrari Mondial 8. If this car could talk, it would probably apologize to every owner for wasting their time and money. There was even an incident where a wife left her husband after he bought her a Mondial 8. When the Mondial 8 came out in the early 1980s, many Ferrari fans thought it was a joke. It turned out it wasn't. The sluggish V8 and an even slower automatic transmission made it seem like this Ferrari was designed specifically specifically to disappoint. They say Ferrari reliability is a myth, and the Mondial 8 confirms this 100%. This car was so unreliable that owners seriously considered switching to public transportation. Electrical failures, weak brakes, poor handling, a complete bouquet of problems that made you wonder, is this really a Ferrari? But the worst part was the design. The Mondial 8 looked like it was designed by an intern who was simultaneously dealing with a hangover and a deadline. The car's proportions were strange, its shapes awkward, and the interior, let's just say that the word luxury was clearly not appropriate here. Despite all this, the Mondial 8 became a part of Ferrari's history, a history they would prefer to forget. 8th, the Ferrari 365 GTC4 was an attempt to combine luxury and sports performance in one car, which turned out so badly that it became a symbol of failure and even won the nomination for Worst Design of the Year. Starting with the design, the appearance of the 365 GTC4 was so dull and featureless that this Ferrari could easily be mistaken for an ordinary sedan. The long hood and unremarkable rear made it look like an inconspicuous everyday car rather than a luxurious sports car. Under the hood, the 365 GTC4 had a V12 that sounded menacing but was just as lazy as its predecessors. Accelerating to 60 miles per hour took so long that drivers started to doubt whether they had bought a Ferrari or some old family station wagon. The car's interior was full of disappointments. The build quality was subpar, the materials looked cheap, and the ergonomics were clearly lacking. It felt like you were sitting in a car from the 1960s, not a prestigious vehicle from the 1970s. The dashboard looked like a random assortment of buttons and switches that no one knew how to use properly. The biggest disappointment was the handling. The Ferrari 365 GTC4 was so cumbersome and heavy to drive that drivers often felt like they were wrestling with the car rather than enjoying the ride. Every trip was a test of patience and skill in keeping the car on the road. The Ferrari 365 GTC4 is an example of how not to make a luxury sports car. It's a model best forgotten. 9th, you might think that the Ferrari 400i sounds like something impressive and powerful. Think again. This car was so far from ideal that it seems it was designed specifically to shatter the dreams of fans. It was such a failure that the factory where the cars were tested accidentally exploded during a test run. Starting with the looks, the 400i looked like a giant metal box on wheels. Aesthetics? Forget it. This Ferrari looked like it was made from the remnants of other cars collected from the nearest junkyard. The long hood and dull body lines made it look like an elongated version of a tank. Under the hood was a V12, but don't let that fool you. This engine was so unreliable that owners spent more time in the garage than on the road. Breakdowns were so frequent that service centers began offering special discounts to 400i owners, apparently to compensate for their suffering. The interior of this luxury car was another joke. Cheap materials, uncomfortable seats, and an archaic dashboard. This is what awaited the driver. It felt like you were sitting in a car from the 1970s, not in a prestigious Ferrari. And of course, we can't forget the biggest failure, handling. The 400i was so unmanageable that it seemed designed for off-road tracks rather than city streets. Turning this car was akin to steering a barge. The Ferrari 400i is an example of how not to make a luxury car. 10th, if you've ever wondered how to make a sports car that goes absolutely nowhere, just look at the Ferrari 208 GTB GTS Turbo. It was the first and only Ferrari with an engine of less than 2 liters, and believe me, the result was dismal. When you hear turbo in the name, you expect explosive power and speed. But the 208 GTB GTS Turbo will disappoint you. All that turbo was just a marketing gimmick to hide the fact that the engine was as weak as an evening breeze. This car was so slow that it once lost in a street race to an old Mitsubishi Lancer. Let's talk about the design. On one hand, it was a typical Ferrari with all the expected lines and curves. But on the other hand, the proportions and details were so poorly balanced that the car looked like a toy. Yes, you could say it was a compact sports car, but in reality, it looked like a scaled-down model of a real Ferrari. Inside was even worse. The materials used in the cabin resembled cheap IKEA furniture, and the comfort and ergonomics left much to be desired. When you sat in the 208 GTB GTS Turbo, you could feel like the pilot of a real airplane, only it was a World War II era plane. And finally, reliability. This Ferrari was so temperamental that owners began to give it names and talk to it, hoping it would somehow reduce the number of breakdowns. Spoiler alert, it didn't help. The Ferrari 208 GTB GTS Turbo is a lesson in why sometimes it's better to just not experiment.